let's get into the Lady Oscar.
Okay. So, you want to start it off, or?
Sure. Yeah, I'm down.
Okay.
Hey, it's Griffin. I'm here with Ryan.
Hello.
And today we're talking about 1979's Lady Oscar. I think a movie that we've decided was the weirdest, most interesting, funniest thing we could talk about. It's a live action co-production between France and Japan, adaptation of probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, shoujo manga of all time, The Rose of Versailles. It's called Lady Oscar from 1997, directed by Jacques Demy.
1979.
1979, sorry. 1979. Jacques Demy directed it. And I've seen one of his other films, Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Big Catherine Deneuve fan, so I had to check that one out, of course, because it won the Palme d'Or the year that came out. But yeah, he was a contemporary of Godard and Truffaut, and he made a live action manga adaptation in the late 70s. What a crazy movie!
Would you say this is like technically part of French New Wave?
I don't know. It's the latest part of French New Wave for sure. It's very late.
So I guess you can make the argument that Lady Oscar is not only an anime adaptation, or not an anime.
It's a French New Wave anime adaptation.
It's a manga adaptation. It's a manga adaptation, but it's a French New Wave manga adaptation.
I mean, you can't say that it's not that, but I will say that 1979 is pretty late. But this movie is crazy. I really enjoyed it, actually. I can't tell exactly how much of the movie I love, and how much of it is just like a manga that is really interesting and like conceptually,
and then like you're kind of projecting it onto the movie or whatever.
Right. But I will say that just the fact that, first of all, they shot this at Versailles.
This is one of the, I think, 2 or 3 films actually shot ever shot at Versailles.
They shot it on location.
That's just kind of insane.
It's impressive. It's very, very impressive. And the movie, because it's one of the only productions ever shot there, it kind of like earns like some comparisons to the much later Marie Antoinette.
Well, also,
Sofia Coppola.
It essentially kind of is the same story.
So it's a lot of the same story beats and characters.
A little bit of backstory, I guess.
Yeah, we should actually just explain what Rose of Versailles is first.
I guess it's kind of safe to say that you and I are both fairly familiar with Rose of Versailles. Have you seen the anime and read the manga, or just like?
Okay, I've only seen parts of the anime, and some scenes from the anime are so ubiquitous and famous online that I think that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like some YouTube poops are actually from like Rose of Versailles.
Right.
Yeah.
When there's a very famous scene of like this like evil count like killing a little boy like in the middle of the street.
Oh, right. Yeah. So
it's a very famous scene online in like the anime.
And he uses like a is it like a blunderbuss type thing?
Yeah.
Like a little flintlock pistol.
Yeah. And he just like ices like a little boy in the street.
Yeah, and the kid, and the main character, Lady Oscar, is just there to see it all happen.
Just see it all happen. And it's part of her being basically radicalized
into, being an
anti-monarchist.
Yeah.
But it's, obviously the anime has way more episodes, and so the build up is like way more gradual. The anime is like
40 episodes long, I believe.
Yeah.
So the anime was also released in 1979, but later the same year as Lady Oscar, the movie. So I guess the movie technically beats it out as the first adaptation of Rose of Versailles.
Yeah, of the manga.
Rose of Versailles was a manga written by Ryoko Ikeda, from the 1973 to 1974. I think that's what I have written. Yeah. And essentially it is a historical fiction that covers the Dauphin era, along with the time period right before and during the French Revolution.
Yeah, it like culminates with like the storming of the Bastille.
Yes.
And Marie Antoinette is one of the main characters.
I think the manga actually was continued in 2014 or 2015. It doesn't continue, obviously after the point in which it originally ended, but I think it's more chapters that kind of fit in between the story.
Okay, that makes sense. What I do know is that there's also like a faux sequel that is about Napoleon, but I don't really know that much about it.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar.
I do know that it has recurring characters though.
All I have read is the original Rose of Versailles manga.
Okay, hell yeah.
Which is only technically recently been translated into English officially. But
the anime's been famous for forever.
Yeah, this anime and manga is like one of the most famous.
And there's a 90s one as well, right?
Is there?
Yeah, I think there's 90s Rose of Versailles.
I wouldn't be surprised. Like 1990.
Just some of the animations I've seen is too clean for it to be 79.
Right.
So
I mean, it makes sense because I feel like the 1990s was around the perfect time for a lot of 70s animes to get like
come back
or get new OVAs like Devilman or whatever.
Right. Or Shin Hurricane Palomar, stuff like that.
Yeah. Tatsunoko,
yeah. Tatsunoko got a bunch of, because even like Kasharn,
wasn't there like
later.
Kasharn, and then wasn't there a Gatchaman one in the 90s too?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. But we're getting off topic.
Yeah, we're getting off topic. Anyways, Rose of Versailles.
Not Rose of Versailles, Lady Oscar.
Well, I thought we were still wrapping up the manga.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think there's that much else to say, except for that it has a lot of the same characters as like other pieces of, because it has fictional characters and then it has real life characters, and then the real life characters, do things that are maybe just like kind of like a guess as to how they would have done those things in real life. But it has a lot of the same kind of characters as other period pieces that cover the same, like
there's definitely aspects of revisionist history there, and then other things are kind of more falling in line with real world history.
Yeah. But it's really interesting because it and this is probably true in the manga as well, but I haven't read it. But it makes like similar observations about certain characters as like other period pieces do. So like, for instance, like the King of France's interest in locks comes up in Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette a lot, and it comes up in this as a bunch
it's
as
like
well.
one of Louis XVI's like weird quirks.
Yeah,
like he's kind of like a weird or quirky dude. Like
he's a really quirky dude,
historically speaking.
Yeah.
And
William Shakespeare would have a field day with this guy. I wish he had lived long enough to know about this guy, because he's like the king cuck of all cucks. It's like really incredible. Like there's a sequence where he is, I don't know if I should explain this joke. So Shakespeare is actually the person who invented the idea of a cuckold, or at least it was a popular concept around the time of Shakespeare. And so there are cuckolds in Shakespearean literature. Yeah. And a cuckold is a person who is so unaware of everything around them that they don't know that their wives are cheating on them, and they also are unaware that they're growing horns. So like a cuckold is like walking around growing horns, and he's like completely oblivious to everything around him. Doesn't know he's had horns, doesn't know his wife's banging somebody else. And there's this incredible shot in this movie where Marie Antoinette is like making out with Count Fersen, and then just above them on the balcony is the king just like smoking a cigarette, like with like no idea. And like he keeps asking her. He asks her about this guy like 5-6 times throughout the movie. He's like, so who is that guy?
He's like,
who's the guy? She's like, oh, I don't
know.
It's like some guy. He's like, yeah, you think he's like the guy who's interested in architecture, right? And she's like, maybe. Like, she just like plays dumb about this like over and over and over again. It's kind of cuter the way that Sofia Coppola resolves it, because Sofia Coppola treats it like it's an amicable open relationship, basically.
Right.
Like they aren't compatible romantically or sexually, and her escapades are kind of her thing. What he's up to is his thing. In this, he is completely oblivious. And but Marie Antoinette is like one of the main characters of the story, and so her relationship with Count Fersen. Count Fersen has relationships with other fictional
I would argue
characters.
that is the case in Rose of Versailles. In Lady Oscar, I would say she's more of like a supporting character.
That's probably true.
Because definitely, so the original conceit of Rose of Versailles was actually a Marie Antoinette story.
Yes, and then it actually gets more caught up in these other fictional characters.
So Lady Oscar was actually just a supporting character for Marie Antoinette.
Right.
And then her popularity was just so much higher than Marie Antoinette. Actually, I think how it was is readers did not really like Marie Antoinette. They thought she was kind of an airhead, kind of very spoiled, which... it's just a pretty accurate adaptation.
Maybe. I mean, I haven't met her. I don't know. So like the Sofia Coppola version is a little more forgiving. But I will say that one thing is that you're pointing on that I really, really think is interesting is that there is something about Oscar that is prolific throughout shoujo manga.
Yeah.
Which is like the gender swap thing. So Lady Oscar is a character who basically lives the life and responsibilities of a man, but is an openly acknowledged woman.
Yes. But also sometimes
pretends to be a man, or pretends to be
male pronouns,
or pretends to be a different woman than the woman she is.
Yeah.
So
that's more of like a film thing.
Right. Yeah. I think that probably is more of the film thing. But she does do that in the movie, and that's what we're talking about. And but gender swap stuff, I mean, Naoko Takeuchi, who wrote Sailor Moon, Takahashi, like who Rumiko Takahashi, who wrote Ranma Half and other famous stuff like what's the other Takahashi stuff? She wrote Urusei Yatsura and what's that one about the dog guy? Inuyasha. But Ikeda, Takeuchi, Takahashi, they all do these gender swap, these gender bendy kind of things. It's such a prolific trope in shoujo manga, and it's very, very interesting to see a live action version of that.
I definitely think the film is far more interested in the conversation of like gender and gender politics and like sexuality than the manga more. Like if you were to compare the two, I think the manga is
I think it's more it seems more political in the West, and I've always felt that way about Sailor Moon as well, because Sailor Moon also plays
because it got censored and stuff like that.
Exactly, like the 4Kids dubs for Sailor. I can't remember if it's the 4Kids dubs for Sailor Moon, but this early Sailor Moon dubs that we watched.
It's probably Ocean dub.
Yeah, who knows? Ocean. Whoever did the ones that we would watch on Toonami back in the day, they would reverse gender swaps, or they would create gender swaps where there'd be less confusion about certain things. And I do think that like the swapping gender thing is just definitely seems more political in the West than it did in Japan, which is funny because Japan, it does have a lot of extremely traditional gender roles. I mean, it's it's a country.
I think what you can do is probably like, chalk it up to theater culture and not just
it does feel in these that you're talking about that it's more like just swapping outfits or swapping characters or swapping roles, like just putting on a different mask.
Yeah.
It feels more playful and fetishistic and less overtly political and ideological.
Right. And I think it's just a difference in theater culture. I think when you have, like in Europe, where in certain areas of Europe where traditionally speaking, women weren't allowed in the theater, so a lot of the female roles would have to be portrayed by men.
I think that was the way it was in the Elizabethan theater. Yeah.
Something similar occurs in like China and Korea and Japan and stuff like that. So I think when you have like certain regions where it's more, that thing kind of carries on for a longer period of time, or is passed on generationally, or the culture itself is maintained for a longer periods of time, then generally speaking, you're probably going to be more accepting or less. You're not going to politicize it as much. It's not going to be a topic of
or maybe there's just an innocence to it.
Yeah, it's just like art.
Yeah. There's a playful innocence to it.
Because like when you look at it, you're not looking at it as a political statement at all. It's just inherently just like kind of an art thing.
But it's easy for me to imagine, people seeing their kids watching Sailor Moon in the 90s and like seeing the gender swap stuff and like being concerned or worried.
Well, also Sailor Moon.
I don't think anybody was getting worried about that in Japan.
Sailor Moon in the 90s, people were not worried about the gender swap thing, really. If you recall, I mean, you probably remember this better, the whole satanic panic thing in the 90s around.
Oh, of course.
Pokemans.
Yeah.
You got psychic powers and you make covenants with the devil, and you catch other Pokemans.
If only they had seen SMT. If only they'd seen Shin Megami Tensei, the Pokemon wouldn't have even registered.
I think if Christian moms in the 90s,
if they had seen SMT, the level of concern,
their brains would have exploded. They could not handle. They would have destroyed computers. They would have just gone around smashing computers.
We would be like living in the dark ages right now if Christian moms had learned about Shin Megami Tensei in the 90s.
But back to the topic of Lady Oscar.
Sure.
Honestly, it's a very interesting film. It pretty accurately, but also not very accurately adapts the manga. It's very, I feel like it kind of is the case with a lot of manga adaptations or anime adaptations in general, where it's very pick or choosy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it picks like what parts it wants to play with and what parts it doesn't really want to play with. Especially the ending. The ending for me.
Yeah, the ending is definitely I don't want to call it an entirely film original ending, but it is film original for the most part. For the most part, yeah.
Because it removes all of their. So in the ending of the manga, this is a 40-year-old manga.
You know what? I'm glad you mentioned
got something
it.
You want to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually wrote a little chart for myself. The camera can't see it; it's too bright. But here, of the love triangles we got.
Wow, this is impressive. Okay.
So in Rose of Versailles, we have several characters. The main character, eventually, I would argue, is just the main character overall. Throughout the course of the story, is Oscar Francois de Jager, which is Lady Oscar, essentially, right?
But doesn't really live as a lady for most of the story.
Right.
For most of it, she's like a guard, a knight,
A royal
attendant.
royal guard,
Yeah.
specifically guarding Marie Antoinette.
Yeah.
And then after she becomes disillusioned with the aristocracy and the behavior of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, she quits and she joins the regular guard or the general guard because she wants to be able to serve the people more directly because that's part of her character development. I will say
but that doesn't really happen in the movie.
In the film.
Yeah. They're present for the storming of the Bastille, but they aren't particularly. They're not holding weapons.
Right.
They're not like storming the castle. They're kind of just there.
Yeah. I will say it is an interesting.
And then she doesn't die.
Point that you put up. Spoiler, I guess.
Well, I'm just saying it's a 40-year-old story. What are we gonna do? It's a 50-year-old manga. What are we gonna do?
But
yeah, it's a tragedy. So she dies.
Yeah, no, it is a tragedy. So it's a romantic tragedy.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting point you bring up. Just to get a little sidetracked for a second.
Sure.
That despite the fact that Lady Oscar is a much more present main character, or is presented to be more of a central character or the focus point of the film.
Yeah.
She has less agency
than
she does in the manga.
Totally.
Which is so strange.
Yes.
And
because in the manga you're seeing her slowly get radicalized.
Right.
And in this one seems like she's slowly getting reasonableized. You know what I mean? Like she's more like it's also at one point I kept thinking to myself, is Oscar a cop?
Yeah.
Oscar's a cop.
Oscar's a cop.
You know, like there's a sequence where she's like, being like ordered to like shoot on unarmed civilians and she refuses to do so. And that's her big moment is the moment she refuses.
And then at that point she already quit, working for Marie Antoinette and she's joined the regular guard or the garrison or whatever. Right. And she kind of just quits and so she gets arrested along with her men.
Yeah.
That's the only real moment she gets.
But then they get let out of jail by the guys who are going to storm the Bastille. Yeah. And then they just go to spectate.
I guess so.
That's kind of what it looks like.
Yeah.
And then Andre, who is like, one of the other, we'll get into him in a minute. One of the other main characters, her childhood love interest, very shoujo tropey kind of character. He just gets shot in the back randomly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is like so dishonorable and like sad. And she doesn't even know where his body is at the end of the movie. She's like wandering around. She's like looking around for him, like wondering what happened to him. And the movie ends like very abruptly. But to be fair, it actually opens very abruptly too. It opens with like, oh, mom's dead. Well, we got a story to get to later. Bye.
That's an interesting thing too, because
it opens and ends very abruptly.
Lady Oscar's mom isn't dead in the manga.
Right.
Lady Oscar's mom is actually a very present figure throughout the entire course of the manga. There's actually a whole conspiracy that goes around.
I think that other character we were talking about was the woman who's like convinced that her mother got ran over by a carriage. Oh, she thinks it was Lady Oscar's mom, right?
At one point, yes.
And then they meet and they become friends, but that doesn't happen in the movie.
Right. The movie, like Lady Oscar's
what's that character's name again?
Lady Oscar's mom is not in the movie, anyways. Oh, Rosalie.
Yeah, Rosalie. Right.
So
Rosalie is in the movie.
That's a whole different character, but
right.
Trying to get back on track. Sure, so Oscar Francois Desjardins is the main character of the movie. That is Lady Oscar.
Yes.
Lady Oscar is betrothed to Girardel, or in the manga Girardel, in the film I think is Gerard.
Okay. Yeah.
That's like the dude where she shows up to the engagement party dressed in her soldier regalia, essentially, with the cape, and then she dances with the woman.
And makes out with a woman in front of everybody, which scandalizes them all.
If I remember correctly, she doesn't actually make out with anyone in the manga. She just dances with the woman.
Probably
and
not.
that's enough to do it.
I think also, they were being kind of like,
they were like, the film is definitely trying to push more of like a conversation of gender and gender roles and gender politics and like sexuality and stuff like that.
But it's also there's a little like it's gay baiting a little bit,
Well, both of them
queer
are gay
baiting.
baiting.
It's queer baiting.
Both of them are definitely queer baiting.
But the kiss in particular is very it's very like who's the person that Britney Spears kissed on stage that one time? Madonna. It's very much the Madonna Britney Spears kiss, where it's like meant to like cause a conversation, water cooler kind of moment.
Well, yeah, because then also right before that scene, the gossip around the party is that like the other aristocrats are like, oh, did you hear about the lady who got branded? I hear she was like Marie Antoinette's like lesbian secret lover or whatever.
Right.
So it's this pretext of sexuality and like, sexual orientation or whatever, which the film is definitely far more interested in having a conversation about than the manga or the anime. The manga and anime, definitely like the two, distinctions between the film and the manga is that the manga is more interested in, addressing person versus duty, or like person versus post. Like, who are you, and like outside of what you dedicate your life to.
Right.
Because Oscar's big thing is like, she wants to be a soldier, and a soldier has to behave certain ways.
Yeah.
But then these certain things that she has to do or she's requested of doing defy her own personal beliefs.
Right.
Right. Which is the major conflict.
Right.
Right. Whereas in this, it's more of just she should be able to choose how to present herself, or how to and people shouldn't disrespect her just because she chooses to do so differently or non-traditionally.
Well, I will say though, and this is maybe something that both stories have in common, which is that both stories seem to have like an underlying idea that all of the honor and all of the rules of society that she believes that like we should all operate under, and that she's been taught, are not really being followed by any of the people.
Yeah, and it's all arbitrary.
It's all arbitrary. It's all made up. It's all something that people say but don't actually do.
Right, and the fact
she,
that
as someone who's LARPing as a man, actually is acting out all of those honors, all of those those responsibilities to the world around them, and the men who are entitled to being men have no interest in them whatsoever. And they just disregard them and walk past them and just brutalize everyone around them, basically.
It's very much like because she wants to fit into the roles that are established within tradition or gender roles. She sees the blatant hypocrisy that exists within people that already exist within those roles inherently.
She's basically constantly being disappointed by the moral failings of other people.
It's not just like the moral failings, but also the society in which they uphold, or the systems in which they participate in. It's like this grand fallacy that she's becoming enlightened to.
Yeah, and she's realizing how integrated they are to one another and how essential they are to one another.
Right, and how that affects the people.
Right.
Because in Rose of Versailles, definitely Lady Oscar's arc is much more involved in being for the people, and understanding that the aristocracy, their benefits are the plight of the people.
Right. They are the problems of
society. Exactly. They are the problem of society. Right. And then, which is kind of addressed in the film as well. I will argue that it's pretty kind of blatant that Marie Antoinette is fiscally irresponsible.
I mean, she's given a significant number of warnings and reminders
about what
about the potential consequences to not just her but society at large, and she blatantly disregards them in a brutal.
And she's just why would they hate me? I'm the queen.
Yeah,
which is very pompous and very arrogant.
Yeah.
And it's just I can totally understand why the fucking French people wanted to totally guillotine this lady.
Yeah.
But in the manga, Girardel is I would argue, a much cooler dude. He actually is in love with Lady Oscar.
He's kind of a mustache twirling villain in the movie, but I will say the way he's cast and performed is delightfully manga.
Yes, absolutely. It's
he actually, to me, is the most anime-like performance and manga-like performance. He has a very sinister kind of dastardly kind of thing that is just he's it's really funny because she keeps trying to turn him off by doing things that are unwomanly.
That she thinks would turn him off,
and they just turn him on more.
And he's just
at one point in time, she suggests that she would sleep with one of his dogs, and he gets really excited.
Well, because I think the film is so interesting because it really villainizes Gerard more than he is portrayed in the manga. Because in the manga, he has known Lady Oscar essentially since they were children, and Lady Oscar has always been this. He wants to be this kind of masculine or male figure, right? Mm-hmm. So he begs his father to let him enlist into the military academy because that's where Lady Oscar is going, right?
Yeah. And we never see that in the movie.
Exactly. This is all from the manga and stuff like that. And the manga is definitely more interested in showing that Girardel loves Oscar because he admires her, right? She is the kind of the pinnacle of masculinity that he wishes he could achieve. Yeah. And because of that, he loves her.
Yeah, her masculine elegance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Her feminine qualities along with her masculine qualities, essentially, right? And there's this big confrontation in the manga that happens between Oscar and Girardel, where she's like, "Do you truly love me for like who I am?" Right? And then this is after like she and Andre I think confess to each other, which is like part of the love triangle.
But there's also Fersen too.
Yeah, there's Fersen, which
because Fersen is Fersen. I don't know. It's really interesting, but they introduce him as a potential suitor of her as well, and she doesn't seem not interested. She is interested.
So in the film, I would argue is definitely more interested romantically in Fersen.
Yeah,
and definitely more curious, like either romantically or sexually in Fersen, and
especially because she's someone who at the beginning of the story is extremely caught up in issues of class.
Right,
and Andre is a lower class than her, and she does not really recognize his personhood. She tokenistically appreciates his presence,
right,
but she doesn't recognize him as an equal, and she doesn't welcome his. She doesn't welcome him as an equal either romantically
like his
or
opinion
otherwise.
or like anything.
Right.
And there's a confrontation.
And Fersen is like a gentlemanly guy, so he and he's not nearly as despicable as the other men in the story either. So he becomes very easily.
And they have to become involved because so Hans Axel von Fersen.
Yeah, we should probably talk about who he is as a person.
Yeah, Hans Axel von Fersen, historically speaking, is
a real person.
He's a real person, just like Marie Antoinette.
Yeah, and they probably did bang.
Yes, it is heavily implied by
the
historical records that they did have an affair, and potentially that one of the Marie Antoinette's children may have been one of his.
Yeah.
Because apparently after his return from the American Revolution or something like that, Marie Antoinette had a child almost exactly 9 months after.
Yeah. Nice.
He returned to France, and so. Fersen, I believe, is
he's from Sweden, right?
Yes, he's a Duke of Sweden or Archduke of Sweden or something like that.
Right.
And
he like hangs out in the court,
He's part of Marie Antoinette's court.
As her entourage, basically.
Yeah, he's kind of just like a famous dude, if anything, or just a celebrity.
He's like kind of like an adventurer kind of guy.
Yeah, and he wants to go to the American colonies to like fight in the American Revolution. And
all depictions I've ever seen of him, I've never seen a negative depiction of him.
Yeah, he's always very like this kind of heroic, gallant kind of figure.
Exactly. I mean, like, what's his name from 50 Shades of Grey plays him in Marie Antoinette?
Oh,
Jamie Dornan.
Yeah,
he's played by Jamie Dornan. I mean, that's a pretty positive depiction right there. He's such a hunk in like, that movie.
Even in the manga, Fersen is a super noble, like super admiral girl kind of guy. Cool. Like he and Oscar get along very well and they're friends. Like the big conflict between he and Oscar is that Oscar disapproves of the affair that he has with Marie Antoinette. And that's pretty much it.
What's funny though is in this, the way that almost reads is she's a little jealous.
Exactly. That's exactly the point I was kind of make, because it's almost like, so in the manga, I would definitely argue that Oscar's like kind of disapproving of like, you're supposed to be this honorable guy. You should respect the fact that she's married.
Yeah.
Why are you having an illicit affair?
She doesn't approve. Yeah.
Right. Versus in the film, it's more of like she's married. I'm not.
Yeah,
type
exactly.
of deal almost.
Yeah.
She kind of has this kind of crush on Fersen.
And he's interested for sure. But he also seems like such a player. He's such a Chad in this movie. He's such a Chad. Like
there's a very interesting conversation that you just reminded me of that they have in the ballroom scene where where Oscar comes in dressed as a woman for the first time. She's presenting as a woman, and she introduces herself as Lady Desjardins. And so Fersen's like, "Oh, so you're Oscar's cousin."
It's so weird, by the way. But yes,
like,
that is. And then he spends the next 20 minutes describing all the ways in which they look alike.
And then
this person and the same
weird
person
feelings he has for Oscar and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, in the film, Fersen doesn't know Oscar is a woman explicitly, like for a long time. He doesn't find out until
long time, but
I would say until
it's resolved when she's
through.
After the bar fight, right?
No,
I think it's after the bar fight. I think it's when she's.
No.
Really?
Yeah, no, because she doesn't take off her shirt.
No, but he doesn't see her topless.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like he doesn't recanize her as like a woman, because even at the ballroom scene where he's dancing, he still refers to Oscar using male pronouns.
Yeah, but that he knows Oscar's a woman at that point.
No, because like Oscar confirms that she's a woman as Lady Desjardins in that ballroom scene, because Fersen saying, "I have strange feelings for Oscar," which would make me, it's confusing because he's a man, and then
he already knows. They had a conversation about it earlier. I'm almost 100% certain about it. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain
'Cause then
that
the
they had the conversation. When he finds out that
Because then that just makes Fersen look dumber. Because then why does he have to be reminded that Oscar is a woman?
he doesn't have to be reminded.
Not just once, but
he
3 times. Then
maybe I don't know.
because then there's
I'm not really sure.
Because then if it's true that what you're saying that they have that Oscar reveals that she's a woman to Fersen at the bar.
I will say that
the
Fersen multiple times is talking about how like no one would ever dress like as the opposite gender in Sweden, like as if it's like it's as if because Marie Antoinette points out that multiple other people within like the courtly society have actually started gender bending as well. Yeah. It's like become like a thing, and he is somewhat scandalized by it and says he can't tell his dad about it back in Sweden.
Well, no, I think it's more of just kind of a joke that he's saying.
Maybe.
Like, yeah, I can't tell my dad, but I don't.
But
really
he says if my dad found out about this, he wouldn't let me come back here.
But then there's the ballroom.
Yes.
And then there's when he leaves for America.
What is the conversation though about then because so Andre and Oscar get in a big bar fight with Robespierre's friend. By the way, Robespierre did nothing wrong. So Robespierre, architect of the Reign of Terror, literally one of the coolest people who ever lived. They get in a fight with him. They go to a bar. She tells him that she admires the speech he made on Coronation Day. He tells her that he doesn't actually believe any of those things anymore and that the monarchy has to go. And she and Andre get in a fight with basically all of his friends at a bar.
She's already
Afterwards, they get the shit kicked out of them.
Yeah,
which is, by the way, I appreciate this very much because I feel like heroes never lose bar fights in movies. And I think they should more often.
It's like 2 or 3 of them.
Exactly, like 8 people. Yeah, they get the crap kicked out of them. But they get all beat up, and Fersen actually comes and sees Oscar injured, like in bed.
Yeah,
she's like all bloody and beaten and stuff like that. Or I'm getting the sequences of these events completely turned around. But I believe that was the part where I think even Nanny tells him.
No, Fersen, I think you're right. Definitely comes to check in on.
What are they talking about then? There,
can't remember the exact conversation, but
right, we're getting into the weeds.
What it leads to is, I think Oscar, like that's why Oscar takes off her shirt and stares at herself bare chested in the mirror for a little bit.
The most French, the most cinema movie, the most 70s French film moment. She just takes her top off. Which she looks at herself bare chestedly.
Which, if I'm going to follow the thesis of mise en scène and stuff like that, if I'm going to use that, right? Here's my theory.
Okay, your theory. Okay, let's hear your French New Wave.
She's trying to reject
big
her
titty
own
theory.
femininity.
Okay,
because it would be reasonable and understandable for a man to walk around
shirtless,
bare-chested.
Okay, after getting in a bar fight,
or lay down bare-chested and be able to just be normal. Versus it's inherently sexualized when it is a feminine figure. And if you
Galaxy Brain Ryan,
if you pay attention, right before the scene cuts, instead of her Oscar just laying down on the bed bare-chested, and going to sleep, she actually covers her breasts
with her hands.
With her hands, which I think is her rejecting the rejection of her, or the attempt to reject her femininity. It's her ultimately having
reclaiming it,
basically.
Reclaiming it, okay, sure. Okay.
Which I think is I'm probably digging into it a little too much, but
it's an interesting scene.
It's so
because there's a sex scene later in the movie, or at least a scene that implies sex will happen, and there's no nudity whatsoever. It's it's played very neutrally. It's an unsexual scene. Like they make love maybe.
It's almost like a confirmation.
Right. But there's nothing really sexual about that sequence at all.
You don't need to see the sexual nature of it at all.
No.
You're just there for the romantic confirmation.
But what's so interesting is that because they don't take any active role in the storming of the Bastille, it doesn't really make as much sense for them to feel the need to make that loving declaration to one another, because they're not necessarily expecting to die the following day. Of course he does, but there's no necessarily reason to think that, because they're not acting on principle in the way in which they are in the manga and the anime.
Right.
But anyways, Andre and here's another spoiler, 40-year-old spoiler. Andre and Oscar end up together.
So Oscar Francois Desjardins, childhood friend, is Andre Grandier. Andre explicitly kind of loves Oscar in the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Versus Andre in the manga grows to love Oscar after Oscar is willing to give up her life for Andre. Excuse me.
Mhm.
I think how it works is like in the manga, Marie Antoinette's like on a horse. The horse goes wild, and Andre is the stable boy. He's blamed for it.
Ooh.
So then
of course.
Oscar lays down her own life in front of the king,
Mhm.
and is like, no, if anything, this is my responsibility because Andre is my servant,
Mhm.
and the fact that he wasn't doing what he needed to do,
Mhm.
blah blah blah, the responsibility.
I saw a bunch of people online refer to Andre as a working class hero, and I loved that. I thought that was very
He
sweet.
kind of is, honestly.
And he definitely has that vibe. He's the most everyman character within the entire story because he
even-
doesn't really represent.
Yeah.
He doesn't represent necessarily a peasant, but he certainly doesn't represent nobility.
Right.
He represents this person who's had interactions with both those worlds, and in that way has like a more kind of real idea of what.
But
the
is
world's
not
really
accepted by nobility
No,
at
certainly
all.
not.
Yeah.
No, certainly not. He's gatekept like entirely, constantly. Actually, he's
Yeah.
tortured with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Outright rejected by nobility,
absolutely.
if anything.
Yeah.
But
But he's kept in such close proximity to it that he's aware of like what urban city life in
Right.
Paris is like, and like what life in Versailles is like.
I think back to the bar fight. I think we kind of it's so integral too because like the lead up to the bar fight is really important too because Oscar is disrespected by a French nobleman,
Right.
an aristocrat, and I think the aristocrat also started by disrespecting Andre, and that's why Oscar got involved. And then they said, okay, we'll duel at dawn. And then he's like, what will it be?
This is early. Wait, that guy? No, that guy was angry that she was worried. Okay, so there's basically a traffic jam of people in those carriages. There's a carriage traffic jam, and a nobleman gets out to like complain about the traffic jam. He's like, "What the hell are you people doing?" And she says, "Someone died," and he's like, "All these people should die."
Okay.
And she's like, "How about you?" She's like, "Let's fucking go." LFG. She fucking challenges him to a duel, and she wins.
Yeah.
And she just fucking aces this guy like it was nobody's business. And they kind of move on. And it definitely, it's interesting because that's one of the earliest activation
But that's why
moments in
she
her.
gets drunk. Like that's
Is
why
it?
she goes to the bar because then
'cause-
she's complaining to Andre. It's like,
Right,
why
right,
can't
right.
I kill like a man?
Oh,
Like I can dress
yeah.
like a man, I can
Yeah.
act like a man, but why
But
can't
she
I?
actually feels bad about it.
Yeah, or like she
Something
doesn't
like
feel like the cold-hearted nature that is supposed to come along with being like a man or whatever, or what they presume to come along with like masculinity.
Which is
or
so nice
race.
because obviously
Yeah.
that's like what the audience loves about her, right?
Right.
She's like a person of like awareness and like compassion. But it's really funny though because Andre gets in that bar fight with her with all them, but he doesn't actually believe what she like. He's there to he's down to like slug with her. But he doesn't actually agree with what she's fighting for in that fight because she's the one
Like Andre is constantly there telling her is like, hey, maybe you should consider like the plight of the peasants.
Yeah.
Or like
He basically the entire movie is like this country actually sucks ass.
he's like, look, this is great for you.
yeah.
For you.
Yeah. Well, because even you remember there's this line where she's like, "No one starves in Paris,"
And then
he's like,
and
"What?"
he's like, what?
He's like, "That's like the main thing they do around here." But of course, she gets in. She picks a fight basically with Robespierre's like friends who are making fun of the monarchy.
Yeah.
And
Which honestly is Robespierre just being Robespierre.
Yeah, Robespierre just being Robespierre, doing Robespierre things. And
French Guy Fawkes.
Yeah, and Andre fights them with her despite disagreeing with her.
Yeah, because
his fealty and his commitment
Yeah.
to her is eternal.
He's a ride or die.
Yeah, he's a writer.
Like literally ride or die.
Yeah.
And
despite the fact that she makes him feel unwelcome and unwarranted
I
pretty
think
much at every juncture.
definitely the relationship is more reciprocated in the manga than it is in the film. Where it's like
At first, I honestly kind of felt like Andre kind of sucked, to be honest, because his attitude was like pretty kind of rotten. But like with more context and the deeper you get into it, I feel like he's actually pretty awesome.
I think what's really great about Andre is that he's in all of the French Revolutionary scenes, like just standing next to Robespierre. He's not necessarily talking or doing anything, but he's like right next to Robespierre.
And he definitely believes
Like
in
he
it.
definitely believes that fuck the monarchy.
Well, and he quits doing that stuff well before she does.
Yeah, like he becomes very disillusioned with the entire system because like at first he was just doing this because one, he's indebted to Oscar
and her dad
and her dad.
Yeah.
And then two,
because also his grandmother is Nanny.
Yeah, exactly. But
who is Oscar's dad's servant.
Yeah.
And Oscar's dad, was the
general
former guard, and he was raising Oscar to be a guard of
General Desjardins.
Yeah.
And it's almost like more of an obligation that he's just kind of fulfilling. And once he And it kind of
it's really funny because he's
argument that
he has this kind of like Byronic element about him, where especially he feels so disillusioned early on. Like he's like chasing this prostitute because he wants to bang this prostitute because basically because Oscar's not interested.
Yeah, but also to make Oscar jealous.
Yeah. But he's doing it in like such a depressing, like sad, like he doesn't
really want to do it, but he's like, I have to do this.
He's just like, it's like life is fucking bullshit.
Which, you know,
and she chases off the prostitute, and he's like, "Why'd you do that?" And he's like,
which, well, I mean,
like, fine, go back to
leads him into Rosalie.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's who the prostitute was. Rosalie, I think.
Was it Rosalie?
I think it is. Yeah.
God, I can't remember. But Rosalie and Jean are like, that's an entire sub story that makes it to the film. Jean is her sister that pretends to be like the lost daughter to this like royal noble bloodline.
What's crazy is I read up the Wikipedia article, should not be using Wikipedia as a source, about that person, and that person actually was like a Valois, like orphan, like so, like from some broken line of the family. But that
King
person,
Henry or something like that. Yeah.
But was like actually involved in that like incredibly famous scandal with the jewels.
So it's funny that you mentioned that. So Jean is the one who's faking it, right?
Yes.
Rosalie, the other sister, like her sister, is the real like lost heir or lost.
Oh, is that how it is in the manga?
Yes, that's how it is in the manga. Before Rosalie's like essentially written out and then forgotten.
Yeah, she's a very unpopular character. Yeah. And I kind of get it. You know what I mean? Yeah. She's like got Debbie Downer vibes for sure.
Well, Rosalie, I actually have it written down here. So in the manga, originally there's like three primary characters: Oscar de Jager, Marie Antoinette, and then Rosalie.
Right.
Oscar is the main character overall, like doesn't necessarily start out that way, but overall is the main character and is torn/witness to the cruelties of nobility, and like is torn by their duties and position, by with their ideals and wants and desires as a person. Right. Which kind of makes this translation over into the film, where the big conflict between Andre and Oscar is choice.
Okay.
Like, you know, this is Andre's choice to quit, to be his own man, to kind of forge his own path, to fight for what he believes in.
Despite the destitution that certainly promises.
Probably lead to,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, he's willing to die for the cause, essentially.
Right.
And he essentially does die.
Yeah, he does die for the cause. But she does too. She's just not as activated as early, right?
Or
she dies in the manga too.
She dies in the manga. She doesn't die in the film.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah. In the film, Oscar is definitely more just like kind of trying to accept the reasonability of Andre's argument that you have a choice in this life.
Right.
That you
Oscar,
as a person get to have the right to choose who you want to be, who you want to love, and stuff like that.
What I thought was really interesting is his way of explaining that point, though, was by talking about America.
Yeah.
And America, and he's like, basically, he says, like, this is the 1700s, by the way. He says, in America, a man is equal. Like, everyone is equal. And I'm like, who's going to tell him?
Who's going to tell him that?
Who's going to tell him? Who's going to tell him? But I do think that, you know, obviously the things that were written in America at that time were influential to a lot of people around the world. Right. Certainly people took Thomas Jefferson at his word that all men are created equal. And this is a deeply influential and impactful thing to write and say at the time. But we were not living that reality. Those are stories we were telling. Good story, though.
It's about the ideological principle.
Yeah, no, and it was cool. And I honestly, you know, the little moments like that as an American make you go like, well, like undeservedly proud of yourself.
But you know, but Marie Antoinette, she's like she's ignorant to the plight of the peasantry. She's naive and airheaded, but we're made to sympathize with her as essentially that's like kind of all she has, anyways.
It's just who she is, and that's just that's just the way it is. Yeah.
And she has to kind of make the best out of her situation, really.
Well, and that's really funny too, because she's constantly trying to maybe like distract herself from the things that really make her feel like unfulfilled in life.
Right, which is like living in aristocracy,
basically,
being a monarch,
yeah,
or whatever.
And like, you know, having basically like waiting for men to notice you, to have value and to matter.
I think is very interesting that the film decides to depict it through the real life historical event of Marie Antoinette trying to adapt the play The Marriage of Figaro.
Yeah.
So The Marriage of Figaro, historically speaking, is a French play written by Mozart.
The music is written by Mozart. I don't know who wrote the libretto.
It's technically an opera.
Yeah, it's an opera.
Right?
Well, the music's written by. I don't think he wrote the libretto. But
okay. Mozart actually shows up in Rose of Versailles. He knows Marie Antoinette.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, like they're like friends.
They knew each other when they were babies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because when she was in Austria, obviously she's Austrian.
She's
an
Austrian royalty.
princess, right?
Yeah.
And Mozart is Austrian, right? And he was like a child prodigy, you know.
He toured all of Austria,
right. And
Hungary, and stuff like that.
And he would play for the royal family as a little kid. And there are stories of them like
upside down or something.
Yes,
like that.
He would do all that stuff.
Back.
Right.
Just like he was kind of like a.
He wrote his first opera when he was 8.
Yeah, no, this like his dad kind of just put him on the road and just like.
Yeah, he's the original child star.
Yeah, honestly.
He's the original Sprouse twins.
But yeah, so she tries to do the Marriage of Figaro, which is actually a banned play. Louis the 16th or Louis the 15th had banned the play Marriage of Figaro because what it is about thematically it's the peasantry and the people coming together to outsmart nobility and to trick nobility because Figaro wants to marry this one maiden. I can't remember her name, but she's the attendant to this lord and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And since they want to get married, but the lord is going to exercise his rights as a lord.
Lord's right.
Yeah, lord's right to essentially just bang her on her wedding night before her husband can.
Mm-hmm.
They had to do this constant switcheroo thing where.
Is this the one from that La Donna Mobile is from? I think it is actually. La
Maybe?
Donna Mobile. I'm pretty sure that's the prince you're talking about. That's the song he keeps singing throughout the play. And what he's basically saying is like women are fickle, but it's just it's ironic even in the play because obviously he is like
it is a comedy.
Yeah,
like it's a very ironic comedy.
Yeah, well, and it's like satirical or something.
And the reason behind its banning was about the peasantry coming together because I think the implication is that Louis just thought that if he had an opera playing where the peasantry coming together and tricking or outsmarting the aristocracy is seen as a positive thing, may cause peasantry to rise up and think they could actually take down the aristocracy, which, I guess it eventually happened anyways.
They decapitated 40,000 people.
Yeah. But,
it's an impressive head count, by the way.
Marie Antoinette is just very out of touch. The manga does a lot of work to make you sympathize with her. Like a lot of work is done in the manga to make you sympathize with her.
Uh-huh.
The movie, not so much. The movie, I think, is pretty much trying to get you to dislike her almost right off the bat.
Yeah, she's like totally unaware. Although it's interesting because they give a important piece of dialogue to her early in the movie where she is like very tolerant of like the gender bendy stuff. Like immediately right off the bat, she basically lets the entire audience know that everybody knows that Oscar is a woman and that everybody's cool with it, and that some people are even like kind of emulating it because they think it's so cool
or inspired by her and stuff like that.
Yeah,
which and then she's like, well, who cares if we're running out of money? Just tax the people more.
Yeah, she does ask them, and the Minister of Finances, who's by the way has just admitted that he, and I don't think that would have happened in real life. One thing I will say right then and there is if the Minister of Finance leaked their financial information to the people of France,
I think he would have been dead.
I highly doubt he would tell them that he did that. Or maybe they would find out and they would kill him, but he certainly wouldn't tell them that he did that. But he's like, I just don't agree with what you guys are doing, so I told everyone. And and they both sit there and they're like, wish you hadn't. Wish you hadn't done that.
What right do you have to release the finances?
Yeah, exactly.
He's like, you stole from the people of France.
And she says like we'll just raise taxes, and he's like, they're taxed out.
It's like, with what money would they pay you with?
Taxes are all gone.
And part of it was also, going back to Rosalie. Rosalie is essentially the peasant POV character.
Okay, sure.
She's much more present in the manga than she is in the film. She's kind of written out very, very quickly in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Like as soon as she gets to the person who killed her mom, she just chokes her out and then runs away and then hides out with Andre. And then just doesn't.
It's not Andre. It's the innkeeper.
Is it the innkeeper?
Yeah, she hides out with this guy who lets her stay for free in one of the rooms that he's renting.
Yeah, I mean,
he says I don't have a feather bed, but I do have a hay cot.
Yeah,
you can sleep in.
And then she's not really seen. No. And then I think the last time she's mentioned is Andre talking to Oscar. She's like, "Oh, Rosalie's here, back at blah blah blah."
Well, you see her also on the street at the end when they're storming the Bastille.
which is everyone's got to be
Yeah,
there.
pretty much. The whole cast roundup shows up for that one.
I think they just needed as many bodies.
Yeah, they just needed as many bodies as they could to emulate the occasion.
But Rosalie she's not only victim to or witness to the cruelties of the aristocracy, but she's victim of the cruelties firsthand.
Yeah, but also a victim of her sister too. Like her sister tries to get her arrested and stuff. Like
her entire subplot is basically boils down to a revenge plot.
Yeah, pretty much.
Revenge against her sister who
Except
betrayed
it's such
her.
a small point that it doesn't feel like it's even a subplot.
Yeah. It's definitely more expounded upon in the manga, and in the manga, Rosalie is a very, very different character. Rosalie is actually the queer bait character or pseudo queer character. Rosalie
and they become
has
close,
a crush
right?
on Oscar.
Right, they become close in the manga. I know that she teaches Rosalie how to dance and stuff like that.
Not just dance, but swordsmanship and stuff like that.
Literature and stuff like that.
Rosalie essentially becomes Oscar's protege, and there's a scene where Rosalie is kind of wishing that Oscar was a man, so that way their relationship could be more normal, and she's smelling Oscar's clothes and stuff like that. It's heavily so Rosalie not only has a crush on Oscar, but also has a crush on, I believe, Andre.
Really?
Because Andre is one of the people that helps her out at first and brings her
working class
when
hero.
she's still a peasant on the street, and then she runs into Andre again while working for under the tutelage of Oscar.
And that was the guy who propositions her with the warm soft bed and the everybody enjoys elegant pleasures or whatever speech. That's the guy that was courting Oscar, right? What's that guy's name again?
Oh,
with a G.
Jerome.
Yeah. That's him, right? Because he sees the innkeeper guy and he tells him he wants to poke his eyes out with his cane.
Something like that. And then he also says that to, didn't he say that to Andre earlier in the film too or something?
No. Well, I think that you're getting those two characters mixed up. I think that's the innkeeper that he says that to. Because he sees a group of men behind the innkeeper, and he's like, if I wasn't outnumbered, I'd poke your eyes out with my stick. And then his carriage rolls up.
Something like that happening.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's Gerard though.
I think it is. I could be wrong.
Because I don't think he has a cane.
He does. He shows it off later. Yeah. And he's always got he's got a bunch of little stuff. He's got he's got a skinny knife. He's got all little. He's kind of an anime villain. He's got
honestly, they kind of just gave all the gimmicky stuff to him from the manga.
Yeah.
Because the skinny knives show up all the time in the manga. The very gallant robes, So in the manga, it's very, very colorful.
Yeah.
All of the outfits are super, super colorful.
Yeah.
In the movie, not so much. The only colorful outfits are of maybe Marie Antoinette and definitely Oscar.
Oscar's outfits are pretty colorful.
And they
try to make Andre more drab.
Yeah. Everyone else.
But he still looks pretty clean for a stable boy.
Everything else is brown, gray, or tan.
Yeah. I will say there's some interesting production design aspects of this movie. So one thing that I love the most about Marie Antoinette, directed by Sofia Coppola, and now this is the norm, everybody does this, is that nobody speaks in an intentionally accent.
Oh my god, I was kind of thinking about that.
But this whole movie is a French-Japanese co-production.
Yes.
And
everyone speaks
English.
Not just English, but speaks in an English accent. Almost not, I don't want to say
there's some French
British
accents in there too.
So
but it's all period accents.
I'm glad you point that out. So
period accents, whatever that means.
The only French accents, or French, because I don't think they're all entirely French. I think they're kind of weird, German or Swedish accents, belong to Marie Antoinette and Fersen.
Yeah.
Because those are the only two people that aren't native to France.
Right.
So it's kind of like a Death of Stalin situation where, I don't know if you've seen Death of Stalin.
I have seen Death of Stalin.
So in Death of Stalin,
Iannucci.
everyone has a different English accent. And Stalin has a Cockney accent because Stalin isn't from Russia. He's from Georgia.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's supposed to be a working class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Steve Buscemi is the only one with one of the few people with an American accent, whereas the rest of the cast kind of has a diversity of British or Australian accents, stuff like that. So I think that's kind of a similar case here, where it's Marie Antoinette and Fersen are the only people without British accents or English accents. Mm-hmm. They have
because they're from Germany.
Because they're not
German speakers.
Yeah, because they're
one's Swedish probably.
One's Swedish and the other one is
German,
Austrian. Whereas everyone else has that period English accent or whatever.
It's just funny. I don't know.
It's just like it was a weird kind of thing, but
I'm not really sure exactly what they were going for with that one, but I do know that like I think that like the modern accent, the like not being like there were so many period pieces in the 80s and 90s, like so many, and all of them have these very forced like elegant accents to kind of heighten the feeling. And I've always thought that like one of
like
the cool
Downton Abbey.
Yeah, but I thought but a lot of times they weren't really necessary, especially. Like I really like, Hunt for the Red October, where like zoom in on the voice and they zoom out and you get the movie's translating for you. Marie Antoinette just skips that step. They're translating it for you. And if you can't appreciate that, then that's your problem. And people at the time did have a problem with it. A lot of people had a problem with it. A lot of people complained about it. But now if you watch, like there's so many period pieces today that all follow the cue of that. Like, movies like shows like The Great. That like there's like all these shows now that like there's just treat that like of course it was a reasonable idea. But this one I just mostly think it's interesting the movie's in English to begin with.
Yeah. I mean,
because it's not an American movie.
Yeah, it's not an American production.
It's not a British production.
Casting kind of just came from like all over Europe. It looks like. But
I wonder if it was something Shiseido had to do about it.
Probably,
maybe to heighten its ability as a commercial.
I don't know if we mentioned this, but one of the biggest sponsors. So this is a Toho production one.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest sponsors behind the movie Lady Oscar was Shiseido, which is the cosmetic company.
Yeah, Japanese cosmetic company.
Still in business today.
Yeah, I mean I see their stuff all over Little Tokyo. I see their stuff in Japan.
Very, very famous.
Yeah. But this movie is basically
an advertisement for lipstick.
Yeah,
the lipstick or
a special
the lipstick that
brand.
Is being worn by Lady Oscar throughout the entire movie is the lipstick that the movie is meant to advertise.
Yeah,
which
is wild. What a wild commercial!
Wild.
What a thoughtful commercial. I also think that like the title cards are really interesting. It's got some like Miami Vice ass like
right.
Yeah.
I think
really bright.
I have a theory. And I could be wrong.
Go ahead.
But this is my theory. I think those are lipstick shades.
Maybe. It's so impressive though at the end when you're like looking at these like extremely garish, almost like
it starts with like a bright pink.
Yeah, it's really
and then
bright.
like one of them is orange, and there's a purple one I think, and then like bright red.
But when you see those title cards in these like bright neon, like almost 80s kind of colors, very disco fonts, and then you see like shot on location at Versailles, you're like, damn, like, all right, I see you.
I mean, honestly, some sets look kind of cheap.
Really? Well, there's only one set that really feels so set-like to me, and that's Where They Bang, which is like their childhood like hangout room.
Yeah.
They have like it's like used to be a barn or something or like a shed.
I was gonna say like the bar looks like the dungeon. Like it just looks like the dungeon was repurposed as the bar.
Definitely, I hadn't noticed that, but now that you pointed out, those are absolutely the same.
The same location.
Absolutely.
Like the best like location shots are Versailles.
Yeah, definitely. Like, but they're impressive.
And absolutely.
And I will say that though that like sometimes the production has its limitations. You pointed out a couple things. I pointed out a couple things. Like the one scene, there's a very, very memorable scene where Fersen and Marie Antoinette are like finally like becoming intimate, and the movie gets like pretty epic with it actually, where they're in this like this beautiful gazebo ballroom that's like all surrounded by windows, and the camera like starts spinning around them like in the darkness.
So ambitious.
Yeah, it's very ambitious.
But it falls short in so many areas. Like,
you can see reflections of the camera.
You can see
in
the
some
camera,
shots.
like the camera bob up and down.
You can see reflections from the lights they had set
up.
The
speed isn't consistent because it's not on a track.
Yes.
Clearly, it's just someone running with the camera.
Right.
Yeah.
It looks cool, but it also it's almost not even usable.
Like Christopher Nolan did it right in The Dark Knight.
it's just barely usable. But I do appreciate it because it's also amongst the diversity of camera shots in the movie. It adds a lot of diversity.
Would have probably just been like shooting that inside the gazebo instead of outside.
Yeah,
the
but
gazebo,
then you would have been. Yeah.
The lighting would have been so messed up. You would have caught shadows all over the place.
Yeah,
but who knows? Yeah.
But I will say that it is a cool scene because it feels like a turning point. You're like, oh damn, something's about to go
definitely like
down.
one of those like beat moments in like in a film that you're like, oh, this is when the affair starts.
Yeah.
Which it's definitely different from how it occurs in the manga, because I think in the manga it's a ballroom like dance that Oscar has to go with Marie Antoinette to, and ballroom or masquerade balls. Sorry, those are kind of like scandalous events because no one knows who they're dancing with type of stuff. Like
spicy,
right? And so Fersen comes in contact with Marie Antoinette at the masquerade ball and then unmasks her when they're in private together. And then Oscar discovers this and stuff like that. And that's like how they get involved with each other.
Right.
Where in this case, it just seems like Fersen and Marie Antoinette just like hit it off right off the bat. Like kind of almost a love at first sight, but maybe it's just a more of a passion type thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I definitely think Fersen has a more of a himbo treatment in the film than he does in the manga.
Yeah, he's got some manslut kind of attributes in the movie.
None of the villains really make it over to the movie at all. The only villain is like Jean.
Yeah.
And her like entire conspiracy with the cardinal, and it's an adaptation of a real conspiracy that happened, to Marie Antoinette, where essentially the cardinal was defrauded of like millions of lire, I think that's what it is,
livre or something like that.
Yeah, for like a diamond necklace that no one ever received or whatever, because someone was forging Marie Antoinette's like signature, and that was Jean, which is Rosalie's sister. But that's more of the historical fiction, I think, taking in, or like the revisionist history and stuff like that. I think in real life, I don't think anyone really found the perpetrator in real life. I think just the scandal itself happening was like
and it contributed. It was a major
contributor to like the loss of faith that
in the institution. Right?
Yeah,
totally.
And definitely,
and certainly like Fersen also does that, because there's like basically lewd like cartoons like getting passed all around France,
Marie Antoinette
and Fersen like banging basically.
Yeah, and it's just gossip, but because
it's enough to just to disturb the
like the poisoner lady. I can't remember what her deal was in the manga. It doesn't really make it over. Or like, is it the Black Duchess?
I would actually say like the main adversary in this is at least in the live action, is Oscar's like suitor, the guy.
Oh yeah, Girardel or Gerard in like the movie. Yes, definitely.
But his motivations. He is actually an anti-monarchist in the comic, right?
Yes. He doesn't really agree with it because he was never given the opportunity to like make choices for himself. He always kind of just bent to the will of his father, who's like, "I am a noble."
Is he kind of like an anti-hero in the comic?
Yes and no. More of like a kind of a what is the term? It's like kind of a Lancer romantic figure. Almost.
Okay.
Like a Dark Knight instead of, because then you have Fersen, who is like the White Knight.
Yeah.
And then you have Andre, who's like the working class hero, boy next door, childhood best friend.
Right.
And then you have Girardel, who is also like a childhood friend, but sort of like a rival, kind of a Dark Knight kind of situation.
Okay. So more actually kind of a good guy in the comic.
Yeah,
in this he's pretty
more
much
of
the
a
villain.
positive portrayal in like
he's pretty much the villain in this version.
Which I think is interesting because the villain for like a decent chunk of the Rose of Versailles manga is the character known as the Black Knight. And the Black Knight doesn't make it to the film at all. Yeah. And the Black Knight is actually we were just talking about him. He wrote the coronation speech.
Robespierre?
Yeah, Robespierre.
Robespierre did nothing wrong.
Like the Black Knight is a Robespierre sympathizer.
Oh, okay.
Like he's like a guy who like took Robespierre's like messages of revolution and stuff like that, but like he's an extremist essentially.
Robespierre's an extremist. But all right, keep going.
But like he was doing the stuff like he put on like a mask.
Okay.
He acted as a vigilante in the night and acting like forms of justice or whatever, peasant justice onto like the aristocracy and stuff like that.
Okay.
Doesn't show up at all in the film.
Right.
There's like not even like a hint that the Black Knight is gonna show up at all.
Yeah.
Which I think is just interesting.
The movie seems more interested in the actual historical events, like the necklace,
right?
Or like
and like how Lady Oscar fits into all those things in like the timeline, because I think that kind of goes into definitely the pacing of it all, where it seems like we start at the birth and then then we go for like a solid 30 minutes and then there's another time jump and then
I wonder if there like for instance, if there wasn't like real life history to look up about this story, would it be enjoyable?
Like I kind of wonder. I'm not entirely 100% set on that. I mean, I really do enjoy it. I'm having a tremendously good time talking about it and thinking about it. But I wonder, like, if this was just a story completely removed from any
history,
cultural context, would I enjoy it? I don't think I would.
I don't think I would, honestly.
I don't think I would.
Okay, so here's a little.
But
experiment
you can't do that. So
if you
context is context.
remove the context of like Rose of Versailles and then like your historical context of the French Revolution and stuff like that, would you still enjoy Lady Oscar?
I enjoyed some things about it. I don't know. She's a cop. Oscar's a cop. Lady Oscar's a cop. I will say Robespierre did nothing wrong. One thing that I thought was really interesting is like learning that Ikeda was like involved in the student protests in the 60s.
Yes.
And that actually a lot of the story is actually
sense.
about her own radicalization. And like that is actually really cool.
I mean, write what you know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really cool to like, and it does. I do think that the story does a really incredible job of like showing how a person's mind might be changed by information.
Just from
around
experience. Not just that, but like also how their ideals and what they believe the world works as, and how like they constantly try to measure it up to reality, and it just keeps falling short. Like everything that they've been told is essentially this kind of grand lie.
Yeah,
which is essentially the central
the
conflict.
Lie that keeps bad things happening.
Yeah, exactly. The perpetuation of a terrible system.
Yeah. It's actually very, very convincing.
Which is something that
Oscar's a cool character.
Which is something the film is not really interested in talking about, which I think is kind of a detriment to it overall.
It does it a little bit.
Not
in the same level. Because here's the thing, though. I mean, sometimes the anime and sometimes like the manga, things like that, are actually they're downright interested in shocking you.
Yeah.
You know, like watching like a count or like a duke like shoot a child in the street like while like basically laughing.
Right.
I mean, it's like very
because what are they gonna do to him?
Yeah.
He's a peasant. And
but they emulate it in smaller ways, like in the traffic jam with the carriages, right? We are shown that people have no compassion for the everyday person, and that they were. There's nothing encouraging them to.
I think the lack of the lack of explicit cruelty at the hands of nobility, like in the film, you know, the fact that it's not really present definitely doesn't get the message that, you know, the inherent system of aristocracy.
And then of course she doesn't become nearly as radicalized by the end of it.
Yeah.
Right. She refuses to shoot.
I think, you know, honestly, now that you mentioned that, the ending makes perfect sense then, because she's just kind of lost in the crowd.
Right.
Because Oscar doesn't reach the climax of her arc.
Not the level of radicalization that the story gives her.
And like in the manga, she does reach like that climax of her character arc. Like she completes it and decides she's willing to die for a cause that is good for the people.
Right.
And she dies in the storming of the Bastille.
Right.
Whereas in the film, she's just lost.
Yeah.
Like very literally so, just walking through a crowd, absolutely lost.
Looking for Andre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
someone who's kind of like been like a moral compass for her, right? She's like looking for her moral compass.
Right. And it's gone now.
Yeah.
Which I think is
there's a beautiful
far more tragic in my opinion.
It is a little bit, especially because if one of them has to live without the other, I think that it feels a little bit like torturous.
Part of, you know, Oscar going to willingness to die and the storming of the Bastille was like one for the people and stuff like that, and because this is what she believed in.
But she's not going alone.
The two is like she's just because like, you know, Andre's dead.
Right.
She's like there's less for her to live for.
Right.
Almost.
Right.
And yeah, like the film is.
But they're also like they're not radicalized like alone.
Right.
You know, they're radicalized together in the manga. Right. They they join like the same cause by the end.
They're radicalized together. Like their troops also like become radicalized with them.
Right.
Like the way. Because I think in the manga, like one of Oscar's soldiers sells his rifle to, you know, get money so he could feed his family.
Well, they make a joke about that in this, but you can't tell if it really happened or not. Andre says it to her. She comes to complain about her day at work, basically, to Andre, and she comes to the stable and she's like, "All my soldiers pretended that they lost their weapons so they wouldn't have to work today." And he's like, "Yeah, they probably had to sell them to feed their family."
Yeah. where it's more explicit, and like Oscar has to make the decision of whether or not to report this crime or not, because this crime is essentially treason, right? So in the manga, that's like more of a moral
imperative.
Placed upon her.
I don't know. I mean,
which
honestly,
causes her to grow.
Honestly, what Ikeda has like created here is really interesting, like from a moral complexity standpoint. Like I would say that, like honestly, the way that people talk about Berserk, there you can actually go that far down the rabbit hole on this.
So I think if I remember correctly,
they're both great.
Miura cites Rose of Versailles as an inspiration to Berserk.
Totally. I wouldn't question that.
Like specifically for his like depiction of aristocracy and like monarchy.
Definitely.
And stuff like
I mean, they have very similar ideas about the way that.
There's a scene in Berserk where the princess of Fodland, what's her face? I can't remember. Like her horse goes wild during the fox hunt.
Yeah.
And that's essentially just ripped straight from Rose of Versailles.
Right, totally. It's the one you were just talking about earlier.
With Andre.
Right.
And, it's just pretty much ripped straight from Rose of Versailles.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So I mean, this was like one of the most popular. This was one of the most popular manga,
wildly influential manga. And that's why it's so cool that there's a 1979 French live action version of it. I really did enjoy it. It's such an interesting little find. I've just been having such a blast talking about it. So.
Was there anything you like disliked in particular?
I mean, there were production limitations, and there was some acting that was downright bad. Nanny is pretty bad. Doesn't really seem that like important in the long run to me. And some of the casting's pretty good. Whoever plays Oscar, she rules.
Right. Oh shoot.
And then whoever
probably should have remembered.
Yeah. And then like whoever plays the evil like suitor, he's pretty good too. Marie Antoinette's not bad. The guy who plays Louis is ridiculously hilarious. How aloof he and like out unaware he plays that character. I mean, what do you think? What do you think, Ryan?
I mean,
positives, negatives that we haven't covered.
Any negative I have for the film is like kind of like, again, something you've kind of just stated, where it's like limitations of this technology or limitations of filmmaking at the time,
or the budget or something.
Yeah, or something.
It doesn't feel like a super fancy movie. It's actually kind of amazing that they got to shoot it.
It feels like it's just a really expensive long commercial shoot. If I'm going to be completely honest, like the sets don't look super expensive. Versailles is the best looking set piece that they have, and I don't even think they utilize a lot of Versailles. Versailles is huge. Like Versailles is its own city essentially. Like totally. And I think they use maybe like one building or like a couple wings,
or like maybe buildings. You see like the corner of someone walking out of like the Hall of Mirrors or something.
Right.
Like that.
Like you don't see the massive gardens that just like exist within within the palace grounds and stuff like that.
Nope.
And you don't see.
And you told me that it sounded like they actually got in trouble for.
Yeah. So the story goes is they were when they're shooting Marie Antoinette. I think after she gave birth to her second child, I don't know if you remember the scene where she's like laying in a bed. They weren't supposed to lay in that bed.
Oh, you mean in this movie or
in this movie?
In this. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. Okay. So it was a bed on location.
Yes.
And they
decided to just lay in the bed and use it and keep the shot in, and they almost got kicked out because that's like they weren't supposed to do that.
Okay. Word.
But hey. That's filmmaking, baby.
That's showbiz, baby.
I mean, other than that, I guess my only real caveats is I really, really, really like the manga a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, I would say I'm a pretty big shoujo manga fan, but like Rose of Versailles and like Skip Beat are like the two like topmost. Like
shoujo manga is totally like, and I would say that just in general, like the West is so obsessed with shonen, and I think that like kind of like the brilliance of the other three most popular manga.
I think it's marketing. I think it's marketing at the end of the day, and I think it's part of it is like it was the 80s, and you had that whole like boys' toy, girls' toy kind of whole shift in like.
Yeah. But I do think that there's something about it too, where they're not selling shoujo manga to us
also,
today.
I think if you look at statistical distributions like at the time, there were more female readers, like manga readers, in Japan than there were male manga readers or anime watchers in general. Part of it was like contributing to like post-war and just the.
And I also do know that when you and I were talking about Bishonen characters in Gundam a while back, part of the reason those characters were so important and so popular
is because like
there was a lot of female viewership.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't get New Type magazine with the cutout dolls for like that's not something you would necessarily do for guys. Like that's like a cutout doll is like is a fashion toy that's inherently marketed towards
women,
girls. Yeah.
But what I think is especially interesting though is that even within the shonen that we get over here, it's such a narrow.
Oh yeah, no, it's like
it's only martial arts like training.
I feel like we get
training montage
10% of what actual shonen is.
Yeah.
Like 10% of the market of what actual shonen is.
It's just gotten very homogenized. I feel like
not just homogenized, but it also has to stick to the standards of expectation of entertainment within the West.
Maybe, but that's the thing though is I think that shonen has taken off so much that it's created the standard expectations.
Yeah, no, I don't
know, like
it's like a catch-22 situation almost. Like
everything has to be a sequel, the spiritual sequel to Dragon Ball Z.
And then by doing that, all you get is that
more Dragon Ball Z. But yeah, I mean, shoujo is awesome. There's some YouTubers who make content specifically about that stuff that I really, really enjoy what they're doing. And this was so fun. I really appreciate this. Good pick, Ryan. Ryan picked this one.
Yeah, I just found this like randomly like scrolling through Twitter, and I saw a thread of like Rose of Versailles. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And then like the random like one comment is like, oh, you guys should check out Lady Oscar 1979. I'm like,
1979.
What the fuck is this?
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, do you have any closing regards?
My closing regards are rest in peace, William Friedkin. Big fan of his. We'll probably talk about some of his work in the future, but most of his stuff is Hollywood.
Yeah, AMPTP project. So
maybe we'll get to him down the road. But big fan of his, and such a massive inspiration to me as like a filmmaker and creative. So I'm definitely missing and thinking about him. Yeah. Anything else, Ryan?
I mean, not really. I mean, would you recommend Lady Oscar?
Oh, 100%. Especially for anime manga fans. Absolutely. This is like got to be one of the earliest live action adaptations.
Oh.
And it's so uncaught up in trying to be
I think it's
anime
definitely
or manga.
within like the first generation of like manga adaptations because before this you have Lone Wolf and Cub and maybe Golgo. I think Golgo might have came out before this.
There's a live action Golgo?
There's a couple live action Golgos, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, no, like manga adaptations during this period are kind of just like historical.
Well, and you and I were actually talking about this yesterday a little bit, which is that like in that era, post 300, post The Spirit, post Sin City, we've decided now that if you make a live action adaptation of something, you have to try and make it look so similar to the source material.
It's definitely like a visual adaptation along with a narrative adaptation.
Right. This one doesn't really concern itself so much with the visuals.
I would say like,
and I think it's more free.
It's more of a narrative adaptation than anything.
Right.
It's not necessarily a visual adaptation, and it's not really a thematic adaptation.
That's probably true. But I will say, it's funny because it uses the same kind of costumes, especially for Oscar in particular.
I think
Oscar's costumes Oscar does look good.
Yeah.
Oscar looks really cool.
Yeah.
But that being said, like the movie is not being bogged down with obsessed with like how anime have we made this? Like none of the characters are acting moe.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like no one's like trying to be
emoting super heavily or whatever.
No, they're just doing it. They're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that like honestly,
the most dramatic scene is when Oscar shows up to like her engagement party or whatever in her regalia.
Yeah.
And she just has a cape, and that's just kind of the most dramatic thing ever or whatever.
Right. But I would say that this is better than most of the live action adaptations we've got,
especially compared to like recent live action adaptations, where like they try to be more or try to be visual adaptations of the manga or visual adaptations of like the anime and stuff like that, instead of just trying to be narrative and thematic adaptations.
Right. I think this one lines up more with like Live, Die, Repeat, Old Boy, Ichi the Killer.
Yeah, where it's like kind of good enough where you kind of forget that it's an adaptation almost.
Yeah. It's probably not as good as any of those, if I'm being
completely honest. If we're gonna be completely honest.
But it's more interesting, and I had heard way less about it, so I'm really excited to bring it up, dig it up out of obscurity.
I know you hate doing this, but what would you rate it?
Oh, jeez. Oh my god. I would rate it a like if Ichi the Killer is a 10.
In terms of
adaptations, if Old Boy is a 10,
in terms of adaptations or just filmmaking,
I would give this a 7.
Okay, so I guess this is in terms of adaptations then.
I mean, I'm being flippant because I don't like these questions because I feel like they're disingenuous to the process of storytelling. But do your thing. What do you think?
And I think this is kind of like a 6.
A 6?
Yeah, like this is definitely like a solid 6.
Yeah.
I don't think it's budging anywhere from there.
No, but it's more unique and memorable than I think actually like a lot of things. So I'll give it that.
There are definitely things that stick out about the film, and I still are like.
I will say a lot of it is context, though.
Yeah, a lot of it is context, and a
like
lot of it.
If it didn't have all the context that it has, I'm not sure if we would be as excited to talk about it.
Yeah,
but it's fun context. It's really good context.
If I didn't come at this having already read Rose of Versailles, I probably would not have enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yeah.
I come at this as like the same as like Shin Ultraman and Shin Kamen Rider,
right?
Because like I'm already like invested, and I know what all of this fits into, and this kind of just feels like an abridged compilation film to an extent.
Yeah.
So it's enjoyable to me, but for someone who isn't familiar with any of that, I mean, maybe if you're familiar with French history and stuff like that and the history of the French Revolution, this would probably still be enjoyable to you to an extent. But
I will say that if you have only even just seen Marie Antoinette, it's actually still pretty interesting because that gives you just enough context.
That's
enough context.
Yeah, that's enough context.
Because a lot of the same characters.
I mean, at the same time, maybe just go watch the movie, decide for yourself. I mean, I found it for free on YouTube.
Yeah, that's how I watched it too, which is OP.
But I will be trying to track down a physical copy of this movie.
Yeah.
This might be just like a guilty pleasure kind of gem. I want to show this to like other people,
especially people who like now that I'm gonna hit up some of those shoujo people out there and just remind them.
Like, hey, Lady Oscar exists.
Yeah, check this out.
But I think that's
all for us today.
That's it for us.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you again. Yeah. Goodbye.